Okay, so thanks to everybody who decided to take a minute or take an hour of their time today to come and learn about Angular UI Router. Hopefully this presentation will be beneficial and interesting to people. So a year ago, I put together this presentation when I was working at Cengage Learning, and I wanted to play with UI Router because I had only used Angular Router, the built-in router, and so I went and played around with it, and then did kind of a similar lunch and learn type thing when I was working there last year, and put together this presentation, and then gave it already. This will be the third time I've given this presentation, but I did prepare it a year ago. So if I can't remember some of my code, I apologize ahead of time for any mistakes I may make here. But let me just pull up a few things I prepared earlier. Okay. So we're going to use Prezi here. Hopefully this works okay. Okay. So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of give an overview of what we're going to complete and what we're going to do. We're going to actually do a live coding session, and we're going to walk through and build an app together. But we're going to not start with a completely blank slate. We're going to have a couple of things already done for us. So I want to give a demo of what the completed project looks like. And then second, I want to give an overview of kind of where we're going to start from. And then I want to explain, since I know there's a lot of Angular newbies at T7 that were going to hop on this call that wanted to learn about this. I'm going to explain a couple of basic concepts about Angular that might be really helpful for anyone who's new to Angular. So what we're going to build here is this app. Let me pull it. I got to get a bunch of stuff out here. Okay. Oh, that's fun. Let me just reopen that since it just died. No. If I was using Sublime Text, it would have crashed already like 10 minutes ago. Okay, hold on a second. I don't know why this is. There we go. And I am a WebStorm IntelliJ guy. So we are going to be showcasing, or hopefully, this wasn't a very good showcase of IntelliJ that it crashed, but I do have, sometimes it gets confused when we're doing a bunch of screen sharing. So I think that made it puke. Okay. Okay, so while that's coming back up, for anyone who wants to follow along, I actually have on my GitHub account the full presentation with, if you go into it, I'm sure Nate is already pulling this down. I have a bunch of commits, which are each of the checkpoints that we're going to go through in the live coding. So you can see the finished product here. What you'll check out is the finished product, and if you want to go back through the revisions and the different commits, you can see each of the checkpoints as we go. And we're going to walk through those and develop those. I'm going to basically develop those from scratch together. But in case I do get stuck or mess something up, we can always just go into the next checkpoint and fast forward in case we need to. So that's a quick overview of that. The reason why I wanted to do a live coding presentation is because I was inspired by, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, anyone's familiar with John Lindquist. He has a bunch of really awesome like 3-minute videos, and I used those a lot when I was learning Angular, and they were just incredibly concise but very well organized. And so in 3 minutes, I could learn some really, really in-depth concepts. So I'd like go watch his video, and then for like the next 20 minutes, I'd be like rewinding his 3-minute video to like, because there was so much packed in such a small amount of time. It was awesome. So hopefully this will be a similar learning experience for anyone here. And anyone who's interested in following Angular, there's an Angular meetup happening in California next week about Angular 2.0. So I'll send out links for this if anybody wants to see what's upcoming in Angular in the next little bit. So This is the app we're going to build, but let me get it. Let me show you the finished app first. So we're going to check out this revision. First check out. Okay. All right, so this is the finished app we're going to build. Basically, it's just a dumb little demo app. There's nothing really special about it, but I have basically 3 areas I can navigate to. And when I click on each of the areas, then that menu navigation option is then highlighted, so I know which one I'm on. As you can see, as I change, an important feature is as I change, the URL follows, so the back button allows me to go back through whatever I clicked on. And then this is the most complicated screen here. Inside here, it's a contact card, simple application where I can go through the different contacts, and then I can use this print contact card button to give me to use that nested subview outside of, just to show how this works in Angular UI Router, to do something like that, to reuse a view inside of a different context. And then as you can, the other thing that's important is if I click the back button, I'm actually going through each one of those states. So Angular UI Router gives state puts the application state into the URL so I can track it in the URL, which makes deep linking possible, which is what's so compelling about it for me, amongst some other things that we'll get into as well. So that's the finished app. And now we're going to rewind all the way back to the starting point. And we're going to code from refresh. So we're going to, this right now is a non-functional app, so nothing happens when I click on these links. And all of what are going to become nested subviews are all just kind of thrown onto the main home page as kind of a big splattering of views. And we're going to actually take this and use Angular Router first to get the main functionality, and then we're going to upgrade it from Angular Router to UI Router, and then show how to use the nested subviews to track state inside my application. So let's do a quick overview of what the code looks like to start from. So in here, our index has, we're using just vanilla Bootstrap to give it its look and feel. And down here in the bottom is where we're doing our script includes. And the important thing is that we're including Angular here, and Angular Router is being included as well already conveniently, and also UI Router. Both of those libraries are already being included conveniently, even though we're currently not using either one of these two, but we're going to actually change our configuration to use those as we go. Yeah, it is currently being recorded, in fact. So we're good. OK. So, and then I'm just using Angular UI includes, which I've conveniently already taken these subviews and put them in their own partials to make the presentation go a little smoother. So the contact screen, which is the most complicated one, here has the contact cards on it. And then the about's just very simple, just to show that you can do that. In our app.js, currently, I normally, if I was doing a more complicated Angular application, I would separate this out differently, and I would organize my code a lot differently. But for this presentation, it made sense just to keep it all in one JS file to keep it simple. So just give a quick overview of what's going on here. So if we go back to index, this is the first thing you'll see that's Angular specific going on here. And that is an Angular directive. And we're going to talk about, we'll talk in just a minute about what a directive is. That's something that I was supposed to cover on my slides. And it's also important to note that I'm including Angular. And anytime you include Angular, if you're not using Angular, then don't include the library, which seems really obvious. But one of the things that Angular is going to do immediately, the second that it loads that JavaScript file, is it's going to parse your DOM and look for any directives. And it's going to be first and foremost looking for this directive right here, the ng-app directive. And if it sees it, it's going to automatically look for a module called whatever here, in this case app, a module with a matching name here, and it's going to try to bootstrap an Angular app inside here. So if I wasn't going to use Angular and I didn't actually have a directive here, then I'm actually asking the JavaScript client to do a lot of work by loading the AngularJS library. So be cognizant of that. If you're doing hybrid implementations of Angular with clients where not every page has Angular, then make sure you don't include the AngularJS library on any pages that aren't actually doing Angular. If you're going to like put it in like a main template that's used on all the pages globally, might be a bad idea. Okay, so going on to our app.js, let's give an overview of how this works. So the Angular, there's a global variable defined by the Angular library called Angular. And if I want to declare a module, then I give it a name. And because I have this empty array, because I have an array here, that means I'm actually declaring, not referencing the module. And this array is used for any other modules that I want to include as part of my module. So if there's another module that's a dependency, I put that here. So I do that just like that. Down here, because I don't have the opening and closing braces, I'm simply referencing, not declaring a new module. So on line 1, I declare a new module called app. And then on line 6, I then reference that app and I add a controller to that app. So let's take a look at the app as it stands real quick. You can see right here that there actually is some functionality I've already programmed into this application to give this, to actually load up Paul when I click on Paul's name and Manoj when I click on Manoj's name and so forth. So let's take a look at how that's done. So let's go to the contact screen. And first thing we see here is we see an Angular directive. And this Angular directive is a directive that says, hey, I want to put a controller. I want to use a controller inside this block. And so now let's take a quick segue and let's talk about what the heck a controller is. So if we go back to this presentation, there's 3 things that we need to know. What's a controller, what's a directive, and what's a service? Well, let's look at the controller that I wrote. So a controller basically has one thing. A controller is a function that has access to the scope, this scope object. And this scope object is an object that is simply available inside the scope of that whatever, wherever that controller is being used. So in this case, if we go, we see in my contacts fragment, I have a controller on this div, then that means that anything inside this div can access anything that's on that scope object. So we can see some special Angular, an Angular expression right there. And so on my scope, that means I'm expecting there to be a property called current contact. And that current contact can have a subproperty called full name, and then role, and then employer. So the only person who actually has access to populate or put things on the scope is the controller. So if I want to add something to the scope here, I have to go to the controller. So I can declare a controller, and by declaring a new controller, a scope is created for me by Angular and then passed to me, and now I can put stuff on it. So the whole point of a controller is to put junk, whatever that junk is, onto the scope. That's all it's supposed to do. So now we know what a controller is. It's just there to put something on the scope. And in this case, I added a list of contacts to the scope. I added a variable called current contact to the scope. And I added a function to the scope, which can load a contact given a particular contact ID. So that's what a controller is. Let's now skip ahead to to talk about what a service is. A service, so before I talk about a service, what should not be in a controller is a bunch of business logic and a bunch of other rules. The only thing a controller should be concerned with is interfacing with that scope object. And once you put something on the scope object, it's Angular's job to do the two-way binding so that if you change anything on the scope, it automatically gets rendered to the screen as you go, and vice versa. If something's changed in the UI, it'll automatically update the objects on that scope. So Angular's job is to glue together and do the two-way data binding between the scope and the UI. The service is where all your business logic should be. And just like here I had module.controller, I can now reference my module. I can use the factory pattern. There's also a service pattern. They're almost identical. One just gets instantiated and the other one doesn't. The factory pattern is a good fit for this. So I use the factory pattern to create my service. And so I just say Angular, I want to go grab this app and I want to add a service to it using the factory pattern. And the service is defined. The reason why there's a function callback here is it's a function that returns an object that is your service. And the reason why it's a function is I can now do dependency injection here. Anything I want to add here, any other services that service might use, like some other service that I may have declared somewhere else, as long as it's in my current module or another module that I'm including as a dependency, I can use that service anywhere I want and inject it into any other services or into any controllers. So here's an example of where I'm injecting contact service, and all I have to do is basically use the right name. As long as the name of this service right here matches the name of the service of what I call the service, then Angular will know to inject this service into here. So this function I would expect to return something, and sure enough, it returns an object which I conveniently called service. That object has two methods on it, getContacts and getContactById. Now this is kind of a smoke and mirrors implementation. If I did a real implementation that had an actual backend, then this would have done a REST call to something. But I just hard-coded some data right into the service for the demoing purpose of this app. So everyone can see what's happening. Obviously here, this simply just returns a hard-coded array for getContacts. And getContactById simply will call getContext and then return the contact that matches the ID that I provided. So that's a simple service there. So the last thing that we haven't talked about is what is a directive. And a directive is simply a controller that also has a template built into it. So it can have its own partial. And that's all I'm going to tell you about directives for now. And I don't know if I have enough time in this Lunch and Learn to get into that. So we're going to skip now right into the first thing that we want to do with this app. Just revert that. OK. And so actually, before we do that, now that we've done the before we get started, let's go into UI Router, which is our presentation, what we're trying to cover here. So the first thing we want to talk about is how does ng-route work? So if I want to take this app that I've written, and I want to now make these links up here at the top functional so that I can, I want each of these sections to be the content of a specific page, and I want to actually create my single page app here. Here's how I'm going to do it. So we're going to just jump right into the meat of that. So the first thing I need is I need my app to depend on another module that does the routing. So that's ng-route, ng-router, I believe. So now that I've told it, in order to include it here, I have to also put it in my index. But since I've conveniently already brought that module in, I've loaded that script, then that's available for me to inject. So I go ahead and I'm now going to include that module as part of my module. And let's go back to the presentation. This is a quick overview. Of what ng-router, how it works. So ng-router provides a service called route provider, and then it provides a directive. div ngview, or ngview is the name of the directive. So that route provider, I can configure that route provider and give it a bunch of information about what I want it to do in certain cases. So I can say when the route gets changed to some URL, I want you to invoke a controller by whatever name I give it. And then, so what that controller is going to do is its job is to populate the scope with anything that this template is going to be looking for. And that's just my HTML partial. So now I say load this controller, and that controller's invoke that controller, excuse me, then render this partial. And the directives, you put the directive in your page where you want this template to be rendered in your page. So let's go now and code that up. So if we go back to index, right here where I'm doing home, about, and contacts, I actually want to, this is where I want, instead of having that just included, I want to use ngview. I want to have this be instead my directive. So I can tell ngrouter to put that there. Now I need to give each one of these a path. So we're going to call this, we're going to have the path to this link go to home, this one go to about, and this one go to contacts. And we're going to take this class active off of there. We'll use that later in a minute. Okay, so if we look at the app now, this probably isn't going to work, or it shouldn't work yet. Okay, great. So now when I click on each one of these, the URL changes, but we haven't finished telling UI router, or it's not UI router, but Angular router, what to do when each one of these happens. So now we're going to go program on the back end, and we're going to tell router what to do. So we're going to go ahead and I probably would normally do something like this, maybe say routes, oops, my caps lock is on. And then I would go to my Angular, to my module app. And I'm going to tell it I want to do, in this case, I can do what's called a config block. The config block is something that runs before it bootstraps. So this is just anything I want to configure up front before it actually starts the application up. And in that config block, I can provide a function which gets injected with whatever is available to be injected. And in this case, if we go back to the presentation and look at that again, there's something called a route provider. So let's go ahead and use that route provider. Now that we have that route provider in place, I'm actually going to go in, can I edit this? I just steal my notes. There we go. I'll pull that up in a second. But I want to now tell that route provider what to do when it sees each of those URLs. So the first one was home. And let's go ahead and steal this. We can steal this right out of the documentation, but I'm going to steal it out of my presentation. We need to do something exactly like that, so we're just going to paste it in. So we want that some URL to be home, and we want that to load partials home.html. In this case, there's nothing that home doesn't need a controller. It's not doing anything special. So we just need it to render the actual HTML fragment. And we're going to give it a default route, which is what this otherwise is for, and we're going to tell it to go to home. So if I did that right, which I may not have done right, we can now refresh this, which I didn't do it right. Hold on just a second. This is what is fun about. Nope, hold on a second. Route, thank you. Who was that helping me out? Okay, so let's go debug this real quick. See where we're puking. I didn't see ng router do 2. Router is not available. Hold on, I can't remember if it's ng router or ng route. Give me a second. It's ng route. Okay, so I used the wrong module name. Okay, now let's see if that fixes it. Okay, now we're good to go. So now I can take that route off and then load it, and it's automatically going to put it back on because the default route is to go to home. So it's always going to just redirect me to home every time. So now we just need to do the same exact thing for the other routes. So we also wanted to do about. We're going to go to about. And we want to do contacts. Just going to go to contacts. And now if we refresh, I should be able to go to about and to contacts. All right, and the back button will take me back through each of the pages as I go. Okay, so the last thing I want to do in this step before we go to the next step is I want to make it so that whichever one's active gets highlighted. So I'm going to do, there's one other provider that I think I put in my notes there. Nope, I didn't put it in my notes. It's called the location provider. So what we're going to do is we are going to, I'm going to actually create a new controller. I'm putting it at the top level on purpose. And there's a lot of ways to do this, and maybe this arguably isn't the best, but it's going to be good for what we need to do just to get this working. I'm going to call it root scope controller. And now I'm just going to add another controller here to my app. And it's simply going to take the location provider. And it's going to put it on the root scope for me. So in this case, because that's going to be root to all the other scopes, and all those scopes are going to inherit from this root scope, I can simply put it right on there. Oops, I got an extra fat finger in there. Ugh. Okay. So now that I have the location on there, I can, hold on just a second, let me pull up my notes. Make sure I don't botch this. Close that. Okay. Okay. So now I can come back to my index, and I can use yet again another directive right here that'll add or remove a class. So ng class equals, and there's documentation about this, which I'm not going to explain, but I can say that I want to add the class active when the following expression is true. And the expression is going to be when location dot path equals, I mean, that should be a triple equals, home. And I want to add the class active to that. This is a little clunky, but this is the way that something like this could be done with Angular's router. So now I say when the class, or when the path is about, then make that one show active, and when it's contacts, do that one. Now if we go back to here, refresh, didn't work. Love it when it doesn't work. Let's see what I did wrong here. Location path, about home, root scope controller, oops. Nope. Root scope controller, location, and did I do that right? Let me just double check myself. Yeah, I did do that right. So I don't know why that didn't work. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to fast forward because I knew this might happen in the presentation rather than trying to debug this in front of everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to here. Controller, see if we've got it working. So I had a bug in there. I don't know what it was, and I'm sorry because I don't want to debug and waste everyone's time. So we have everything working the way we wanted. And just so everybody's convinced that I didn't cheat, the actual implementation I just came up with is exactly what it is working with the way that I had just coded up, and I don't know what the bug was. So, all right, so there we go. That actually seems pretty painless. Like, pretty quickly we were able to take an app and add router to it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade this from the regular Angular router to UI router. So if this particular route looks like this in NG router, here's what it would look like in UI router. So I highlighted in yellow all the things that are different. So UI, it was NG view switches to UI view. That's the name of the new directive. And as an optional name where you can have named views, we don't need this for what we're going to do. What was previously the route provider is now the state provider, because UI router is actually a state machine, and it's more interested in states than it is in the actual route. And then instead of having routes, we have state names here. And then those states are mapped to actual routes or URLs. So let's go ahead and let's upgrade to UI router. Okay, so should look like this when we're done. So first thing I need to do is I need to bring in. I don't want a dependency on NG route anymore. I want a dependency on UI router. Hopefully I remember that correctly. I have to double check that before we run it. Now that we have UI router, this route provider will no longer be available, but state provider will be. So we're going to go ahead and replace this with state provider. And we're going to go clean up our code. So we're going to switch everything that's route provider to state provider. And everything that says when, we're going to switch to state. And the way that they do their default route is with this URL provider instead of state provider. So we need an AutoWire and URL provider as well. We're almost there. Now we need to put the URL as a configuration parameter. So it'll look like this. And this is now the state name. So we're going to name it, we're just going to name it home. And contacts and about respectively. Switch those to state names, so no longer a slash. And so let's see here, state provider on it. And then the default route is going to be home instead of some URL. So that right there should be our new configuration. So now the configuration step is done. Now we need to go back to our HTML, and we need to switch our ng view to the new directive, the UI view. And this location thing we were doing is no longer valid. So let's go back to here. There's no longer a location provider. Instead, we have a state provider. Let me just let's go back. So that's actually on the next slide where we review some of that. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And if we want to see a state, we want to use this state provider here. So it's $state. So we want to make that available in our page. So we're going to put that on the root scope, which once again, debatably not the best way to do it, but what we're going to do for this demo. So now if we go back to our index, now that the location is no longer there, we want to use state instead. And if we go back to here, it's going to be state.includes and then some state. So let's go ahead and rewrite that. Actually, there's another way we can do this that will not. Okay, hold on. Let's do it two different ways. So now there's also this additional directive, UI sref, that we can use in place of the href. Let's go ahead and steal this. And rather than giving it a path, you just give it the state transition you'd like this link to do. So I'm going to replace the href with UI sref. The state I want to go to is home when I click on this link. So it would look like that. UI sref. State I want to go to is about. And UI sref. Oops. I want to go to the state called contacts. Now, if I use the UI sref to do it, then they also provide this UI sref active directive, which will add the class for me. So I can now take that clunky thing and make it less clunky by doing this. Oh. Let's see if that worked. Not at all. Let's see what we did wrong. So let me go back to app. Check our revision. Okay, first of all, that's what I did wrong. Okay, I knew I was going to forget this. It's not UI dash, the name of the module is UI.router. That's probably our mistake, but let's see if that does it or not. Okay, that worked. So now we have, the app does the exact same thing as it did before. We just simply upgraded it from Angular router to UI router. So let's now move on. The next checkpoint we wanted to do, so we just converted from ng router. Now we want to make the contact card into a separate nested view. So one of the things I messed up and didn't explain, shoot. Let's go back, let's backtrack just for a second. If you guys remember the list contact controller, if we go, so I'm actually going to rewind back to the start, and then we're going to fast forward as soon as I explain this little quick point. So let's take a look at the contacts right here. You'll notice the way that I never explained how this was working before. So let me refresh. I never explained how I was getting that contact, how I was getting that contact controller in there to actually put the functionality onto the screen. And the way I was doing it is I said, I want to use a controller, and I put that on the div around the contact inside the partial. So now if we go back to app here, we'll see no mention anywhere in any config blocks of the contact list controller. But as soon as we go back and we fast forward back to where we were, so as soon as we converted to, it'll be the same actually in NG router as well as UI router. Let's check out. You'll see that here, this is one of the things that we didn't need in the first two states, but in the last state, rather than having the controller hard-coded into my HTML fragment that it's going to use, I can now take that out and leave the fragment clean, and now tell the router, say, hey, before you load this template into your directive, use this controller that I provide in my route configuration that will actually populate the scope before you render that view. So it helps you to decouple those two things. So I just wanted to explain what this line is doing right here. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and make the contact, we're going to make the contact card into its own nested view. The reason why we want to do that is it's not going to change any of the functionality, but if you notice, if I hit the back button right now, it's just going to go, well, that's not really quite, let's go back to contacts. So if I'm here and I click the back button, it's just going to take me back to my previous state. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted each one of these states to be exposed on the URL. So if I hit the back button, it'll go back to Andrea or Manoj, but instead it's not working. So we're going to use UI router to track our state on the URL as we go. But in order to do that, we want to use nested views. So we're going to take this part of the screen right here, and we're going to make that into a nested view. And we're going to load that nested view as a child state. So that when so that we tell UI router, say, hey, Paul is actually a child state of contacts. And so UI router will know that when I load Paul, that it can put Paul's card right here. So I'll show you how to do that. So the next thing, so let's see. So what we're going to want is we're going to want another state here. We're going to want to take the contacts, and we have, let's see here. We'll take the contents of this div right here. Let's extract it into its own. See if I get that right. Yeah, okay. We're going to extract this into its own partial. We'll call it contact card. Paste. Oh, sure, we can add it again. I'm going to paste that in. And now that we've done that, we don't need. Hold on. I didn't want to get that outer div on there. Now that we've done that, we don't need the contents of this div anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and nuke that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to use the directive UI view again to load the contents of this div. And it's going to put that contact card, that new contact card we just created, inside this div when we load that state. So now we have to tell UI router that we want to have a child state. The way that we tell it we want to have a child state is simply by, I don't know, I hate when people use the word simply in there. This isn't really simple. Is by using the name, you use dot notation. So if I want a child set of contacts, then I just reference it by saying context.contact card. And now it knows that it's a child of contacts, and that's how UI router does it. There's some other optional ways of doing it as well, but this is the preferred way that I've been doing it when I've used UI router. And now we can give this its own URL. We can call it contact card. And I'm trying to think if we need a controller for this. I don't. Let me think about this for a second. We do want a contact card. So we're going to create a contact card controller, which we haven't created yet. And then it's going to load the contact card partial when we actually load that state. So one more thing that we're going to want to do now, in order to make this work, we have to put a parameter on the contact card state so we can pass the ID of the contact that we want to load. So we'll say contact ID is an optional parameter here. Just a second. Okay, so now all this, so let me start working on that contact card controller, because that's what we're going to need to write next. I'm going to just chain that in. Contact card controller. So the list of contacts is still going to be in the parent view, but all this other stuff is going to happen inside the child controller now. The child controller is the one that needs to populate the scope with the current contact on it. So the only problem is that we need to get the ID of the currently selected contact in order to know which one to load. So the way we get that is by using the state provider again. State. There's another one called state params that we're going to need. And we can use we can use state params, and you can use that. So if we go back to the presentation, look at this, we can see that state params has this state params dot ID, whatever ID we want. So we can say $ state params dot, and we're going to call that contact ID, and that'll give us the ID of whatever the contact ID is. So so contact ID is, we can reference there, and that's what we needed right here to look up our next contacts. So let's go ahead and put that right here. And so now the current contact's going to be whichever guy we loaded, whichever guy we passed a parameter in. So now we have to tell our state parameter. So we need to go back now and work on the contacts real quick. Right now, when you click on one of the contacts in a list, so let's see if I don't reload this, if it'll still function. Every time I click on one of these contacts, it's firing this load contact function. But I don't want to do that anymore. Instead, I just want to transition to the next state and pass the contact ID in, and then I won't need this load contact function anymore. So I can get rid of that. But in order to do that, I need to switch the way that I was implementing my contacts here. So in my ng repeat, rather than on each click calling load contact, instead, I'm going to use that same UI sref, or what was that? Was it UI sref? Yeah. And I'm going to tell it I want to transition to the contact. I got to make sure I get this right. Hold on just a sec. Yeah, okay. That's what I was afraid of. So I can either do it like this. I can say, what was the name of the state? Can I remember? The name of the state, the parent state is contacts. So if I want to get to this one, I'd say contacts.contactCard. So that's what I'm going to do. That's the state I want to go to. And I want to pass a parameter to that state. The parameter is the current contact ID. And our ng repeat is aliasing the current contact as C. So I say C.contactID is the current contact ID. So we'll transition to the contact card for contact ID X when we click on this link now. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I left out. I'll point out one more thing. Rather than hard coding this view to a specific parent state, I can decouple it. And if I start my state with a dot, it'll actually look up and see what the current state is, and it'll look for a child state of contact card of the current state. So that's equivalent to what we had, only now it's decoupled. It's not as brittle. So that would be the preferred way actually to do this. Okay, now let's see if that worked. I don't actually know if this is going to work yet, if I've missed something. Okay, we're getting there. Let's see, what did we do wrong? Okay, we have the UI view is spelled wrong. Let's fix that. See if that was the problem. Okay, we're getting there. And once we get into UI view, that's going to load the contact card, looking for current contact.full name. We come back to app. Current contact, contact ID, came off the state params, and puts current contact on the scope. Contacts, I misspelled that with that extra S. Okay, let's see if that was our missing thing. Not quite there yet. What did we do wrong? See, in John Lindquist's videos, he gets everything right the first time because his videos are edited. But hold on just a second. Go back to this. So the transition, the UI sref, I don't think is working correctly. Whoops. Let's go and look at the UI sref on this page right here. Contact. Oh, I did this wrong. I should have gone and looked at the docs. The way that I do it, because I might have more than one param I want to pass in, I actually named the params. So I want to say contact ID is contact ID. So I give it a JSON object with all my parameters, name value pairs, pass into there. Let's see if that was the missing link. We see that you can see now that it's transitioning correctly, but something's not quite working. The URL is changing, so that means the sref is working and it's highlighting the correct one that we've highlighted. But we have something wrong inside our actual state transition. So let's look here really quickly. Contact card, contact ID, contact card controller. Contact card controller. So I don't know what the problem is off the top of my head. So I'm going to fast forward because we only have a few minutes left. So we're going to go skip ahead. You can see what changes to see if there was anything obvious. Oh, I was going to explain that. I actually knew this was coming. This let's go see. So this is going to work now, but this was not the bug. I don't know what the bug was we were just looking at. But what I want, the reason why I put this, I first checked to see if we even have a contact ID, because if I come in to this state without a parameter on it like that, I wanted it to default to the first contact in the list. Whoop. And the reason why I wanted it, see, there we go. It puts the one back on. What's happening is it gets here and it says, okay, if there wasn't a contact ID parameter, then transition manually to a hard-coded contact. So there is a way to actually transition states programmatically as well. And so that's what I did here. Other than that, it was exactly the way we wrote it before. Oh, I know what my bug was. I just realized what it was. My bug was that params are strings. And that's important because when I passed my contact ID in here, I didn't write this. I wrote this. So this is the bug. The fix of the bug is before it looked like this. So if we revert that, it'll be broken again. Assuming I don't create malformed stuff. Wait, what is going on? So my problem was, my problem was that this underscore function find where was not finding a match because it was comparing a string with an integer. So my bad for designing this wrong, but the fix for that is simply to put a parseInt on this and turn it to an integer before using the find where function. Okay, so now we have the working app. Okay, the last thing I wanted to do, which we're now out of time, we only have 2 minutes left, is I wanted to show how you could easily take this contact card and make it and use it inside of a different context. So you want to actually use this nested view all by itself for like a print view. So I was going to implement this print contact card. And so I'm just going to talk through this and then we'll fast forward since we're out of time. And the way I would do that is I would simply take this contact card state and I would actually not make it a child anymore of the contact's parent state, the list state. So now it's just its own state all by itself. And I can give it whatever URL I want. Or whatever card, a contact ID. Use the exact same controller, use the exact same contact card. And let's see if that works. So now if I've done that correctly, I should be able to reload that. My whatever card URL there with 5, and voila, it worked. It brings up this state now by itself, not as a nested subview, but as its own parent view. And I can go through all the different people by changing this manually. So that's pretty slick. It gives you good reusability of your views, gives you deep linking, which is very valuable to most clients and definitely makes applications more usable. So hopefully, we're out of time now, but hopefully for everybody, this was a useful introduction to Angular, as well as showing off UI Router and giving you an example of how to use UI Router if you're thinking about using that in your next project. So are there any other questions that anyone wants to ask in the last couple minutes here? Anyone have any burning desires to ask? I'm sure Nate has a couple of questions, right, Nate? Oh yeah, yeah. Because I wanted something that would crash when I do screen shares. Any other questions or any other comments or anything? Go ahead, Mundi. Yep. Yeah, party time, isn't it? Okay, well with that, everybody, come up with the best topic you can think of and start thinking about what you can present next. And we'd love to hear what everyone has to say. And if you have any other requests from me for other Angular topics, let me know, and I may be able to put something together. But thanks everyone for their time, and go enjoy the rest of your day. All right, you bet.